Hi, I'm Wiley, and you want to know... So, in my last video, I spent a lot of time criticising Dawntrail's story, and rather than just leave it at that, I wanted to take that criticism one step further. A genuine attempt to reflect on what I feel could have improved the experience of the expansion. This video isn't about tearing the expansion apart, quite the opposite. It's about asking a simple question. What might Dawntrail have looked like if its core ideas had been executed differently? I need to be clear up front. Despite the slightly clickbaity title, this isn't me claiming that I could write a better expansion than the team at Square Enix. I don't believe that, and that's not the point of this video. This video is essentially a creative thought experiment, a way for me to engage with Dawntrail's themes, address the criticisms I had, and to explore how the same ingredients might have been arranged differently to better support the story I feel the expansion wanted to tell. Think of this less as how it should have been written and more as, wouldn't it have been cool if it had played out like this? Let's look at what we need to address to accomplish these changes we wish to see. Number 1, the core principle, resetting the tone and the stakes. Number 2, fixing the pacing, cutting the narrative bloat. Number 3, balancing the cast. Number 4, the world and exploration. Number 5, revising the endgame, essentially the Solution 9 sequence. And number 6, this is more a pet peeve of mine, but the rewards and progression adjustments, but that will come at the very end. Now, let's dive a little deeper into the first 5 points. I've tried to lay this out in a one-by-one kind of way, but I couldn't figure out a clean way of doing that, as each point kind of impacts the others significantly, turning this from a here's my fun key points I'd want to change into a here's my very serious video essay. So I'm going to try and keep it as light as I can. I'll add breaks where I can to try and break up the info a little bit, and hopefully it continues to come across as I intended. So let's just get into it. This is the foundation upon which all 5 changes will be built, and as such, a few things need to happen. The core story is kept personal, regional, and ideological. Our main focus remains on Wuk Lamat, but she's only 50% of our total narrative drive. Actively spending time away from Wuk and exploring with Kryl, Grahatia, and Erenville, occasionally maybe running into the other Scions. Nobody should reference the Warrior of Light's power. We're simply a glorified tourist in this setting. And spend more time exploring Wuk's brother's machinations, and add more narrative depth to Wuk's relationship with her father and her people. So, let's start at the focus of this expansion. So, right off the bat, for my rewrite, I would essentially split the story into 2 focuses: Wuk Lamat's Rite of Succession and individual exploration of the continent with our other aimless friends. For the most part, the narrative of the story is perfectly fine for the Rite of Succession. 7 keystones must be obtained for one of the 4 promises to become Dawn Servant. None are found by force. All are granted through trust, challenge, and cultural recognition. This should be the main focus of the story. Also, at no point should the Warrior of Light be the one to obtain a keystone. Our function should be minimal in the acquisition. It really irked me during the MSQ when our task was to make Gibrik Pabil, yet Wuk had no hand in its creation, nor ZoraalJa in that, for that matter. I get that building relationships is a key part of becoming the Dawn Servant, but they should still need to perform the tasks for themselves. Also, the keystones will also need an update. Acquiring the keystones should be a verdict, not proof of completion. After some careful thought as to how this could be accomplished, essentially I came to the idea that the keystones themselves should just be empty ether wells. That once the promise has fulfilled the duty to acquire that keystone, the promise and the trial judge would then each act upon that keystone, the promise filling the stone with ether and the judge applying a sigil to it. Then, once attuned, if the keystone falls out of the assigned promise's possession, that sigil would not react to any other ether but the attuned promises. This is essentially to cut out the nonsense storyline of you can just steal all of the keystones at the end of the rite. It makes no sense narratively because that's not what's being tested by the rite. So we can still have Bakool Ja Ja try to steal a keystone, but once he realizes that it doesn't work because it's not attuned to him, that storyline is closed off like immediately. It's not a constant looming threat. And it also provides better narrative reasonings for Bakool Ja Ja's decisions later in the story that I'm about to propose. As for the challenges themselves, these are a few of the changes that I'd make. I would essentially keep the first keystone as it is, essentially a gimme, ending with a solo instance duty and demonstrating how keystones are activated. I would make the focus for 2 of the dungeons the actual Rite of Succession trials. This can be done in a number of ways, but I would liken it more to some of the older dungeons where there are more branching paths rather than the pull 2 packs, boss, pull another 2 packs, boss. Like, just add some variation to it. Make them a little more like a variant dungeon, but not as extreme, let's say. Next, I would make Thancred and Urianger dungeon bosses. They need to believe that their promise is who should be leading Zoraal, and they need to defend that decision against us, against ZoraalJa, and against Bakool Ja Ja. It doesn't need to be an all-out brawl. It can still be like a melee among friends, but there needs to be some level of conflict here, because that's what was missing from the promise that we were given before Dawntrail was released. We were promised conflict within the Scions, and that conflict amounted to like a brief disagreement, which is nonsense. Let us fight them. It shows an actual moral conflict between the 2 defending parties, and it just gives us another fun dungeon boss. Next, make 2 additional instance duties focused on puzzle solving and treasure hunting. Then I would make the first trial boss Bakool Ja Ja's reflection that we fight for the Mamulja keystone. I felt that this was a really underutilized aspect of the main story quests. This should have been a lot bigger than it is. Like, we get to fight Bakool Ja Ja themselves in the MSQ, but this is a reflection of Bakool Ja Ja in his prime. That has trial written all over it. Then the final keystone remains the Skydeep Cenate dungeon. Only this time the final keystone is given to us by Bakool Ja Ja himself when we reach the end and need the stone to gain entry into the portal room. Other than these changes, I would also make a slight change to the order in which the keystones are obtained, and they would be as follows. The Hanu Hanu keystone is acquired first through an instance duty, then the Zoraal keystone through an instance duty, the Pelu Pelu keystone as a dungeon, then the Mamulja keystone as a trial, then the Yok Hoi keystone, which would be a dungeon, then the Moblin keystone, which is an instant duty, and then finally the Tulialo keystone, which is again a dungeon. Our initial hook into Dawntrail's story is Wuk Lamat's warning to the Warrior of Light, "My brother should never take the throne." Yet the story itself really struggles to show us why. ZoraalJa appears competent, controlled, and on the surface at least, entirely legitimate. The issue that ZoraalJa faces is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Rite of Succession is actually testing. Where the rite rewards recognition, consent, and cultural fluency, ZoraalJa believes it exists to crown the strongest, the most decisive, and the one most willing to impose order. From his perspective, leadership is proven through dominance, not relationship. And by that metric, he believes he has already won, a mismatch in understanding that ultimately proves fatal to his claim. ZoraalJa's sense of entitlement isn't even born from arrogance alone, it's cultivated through his understanding of his culture's expectation. He's the first known single-headed child of a two-headed Mamulja, marked by the fabled blue scales, and born to a celebrated leader. Only while his adoptive siblings earned love through intellect or empathy, ZoraalJa was shaped almost exclusively through combat. Strength became the only language that he was taught to speak. And throughout the rite, this flaw manifests again and again. He treats tribes as obstacles, not partners. He seeks outcomes rather than understanding, and while no culture refuses him outright, they simply withhold their endorsement of him. Their silence ultimately manifests, in his mind at least, as betrayal. This is the point where ZoraalJa begins to fracture. Where Wuk Lamat earns recognition organically, and Koana secures conditional respect through competence, ZoraalJa is left with nothing but his certainty that he's right at least. But that certainty alone is not enough. When the rite eventually denies him the legitimacy he believes he's owed, he does not reflect, he escalates. This is where Alexandria becomes his answer. All of this adds up to a character overcompensating for his own inadequacies. ZoraalJa does not turn to Solution 9 out of curiosity or desperation alone. He turns to it because it finally validates his worldview. A system where power enforces order, where consent is irrelevant, and where strength is enough. And for the first time, the world bends to him. For me personally, the perfect end to the core MSQ for Dawntrail would have been this. The Electrope Dome appears outside of Shalawani, and a massive ships fly through the sky. By the time the Warrior of Light and Wuk Lamat reach Tulialal, the city's been invaded, its population decimated, and Bakool Ja Ja has been killed by his only biological son. Then we close on Wuk Lamat's cries for her father. End. That's it. The Empire Strikes Back style scenario, where the story does not end with triumph, but with consequences, not only leaving us, the player, wanting more, it reframes the entire expansion. This is not the fall of a villain, it's the catastrophic success of a man who is answering the wrong question perfectly. Patch 7.1 then becomes the reckoning. Solution 9, Alexandria, and Living Memory are no longer curiosities introduced too early. They are scars left behind by ZoraalJa's failure to understand what leadership actually demands, and only leaving us with more questions. What the hell just happened? What's next? And how do we even recover from this? Next, we have Bakool Ja Ja. His character is a little more straightforward than ZoraalJa's, but I feel that he was done a great disservice in how he was handled originally, particularly regarding his redemption arc. For Bakool Ja Ja, the Rite of Succession isn't a birthright, nor an inheritance. It's an unassailable position, a way for him to silence doubt and proof positive that he was right to want more. He is driven by a need to prove that he's not lesser. Having grown up within a culture that equates worth to visible recognition, Bakool Ja Ja's flaw in seeking out the role of Dawn Servant isn't malice, it's self-erasure. He has an inferiority complex because he misunderstands silence for judgment. Nobody has outright told Bakool Ja Ja that he's unworthy of recognition, but he's also not sought out, deferred to, nor included in key conversations. He feels inadequate, present in Zoraal society, but not affirmed by it. This is why the Rite of Succession breaks him so easily. The Rite of Succession is brutally honest. It does not elevate ambition, it simply reflects standing as it already is. And from the start, Bakool Ja Ja constantly compares himself to Wuk Lamat, someone who is seemingly effortlessly beloved. ZoraalJa, a commanding presence and feared if not respected. And even the Warrior of Light, someone who is a universally recognized individual. Standing next to them makes his own lack of recognition feel like proof of inadequacy. It's for this reason that it's easy to see, from Bakool Ja Ja's perspective at least, the system is stacked against him. In his eyes, recognition feels inherited, not earned, and playing fair would almost guarantee invisibility. It's for this reason that cheating becomes a way to force the world to acknowledge him, and will act as a test as to whether this recognition is real or just pageantry. He doesn't think, "I'm evil." In his mind, winning will force everyone to admit that he mattered. His character is just as tragic as ZoraalJa's, but where ZoraalJa externalizes his malice and frustration, Bakool Ja Ja internalizes it. Where ZoraalJa would think, "If they refuse me, they are wrong," Bakool Ja Ja would think, "If I look like the winner, maybe I'll be one." With all that said, I feel that his frustrations should have shown sooner in the story, perhaps as follows. When he discovers that he cannot intimidate or cheat his way to a keystone, this causes him to act out for attention. Being unable to obtain the keystone from the Zoraal leader, he leaves the other promises in search for the next keystone, and more importantly, the recognition that would come with it. On meeting with the Yok Hoi, he is once again unable to obtain the keystone, but he hears the story of the primal caged by their people. What better way to gain attention, appreciation, and acknowledgement than to defeat a beast that has plagued their land for centuries? Only, he overestimates his own strength, and on releasing the beast, is unable to engage with it. He is, however, found out and jailed for his crime. Also, this time, he's on his own. The beast isn't stopped straight away. It's not even brought to the Warrior of Light's attention until we attempt the trial of the Yok Hoi ourselves. And by this point, they're already in a panic for their people. The bird has since disappeared, but as we travel through other lands, we see the devastation it's left in its wake. When we eventually encounter Bakool Ja Ja's mother in Dawntrail, who in turn gives us the emotional gut punch of why Bakool Ja Ja feels the way he does, a mistake of his own world and the cause of his mother's disgrace, we catch a small glimpse of the stress and feelings of inadequacy that Bakool Ja Ja experiences due to the abhorrent practices of the Mamulja's ritual sacrifices and disposal of children born unfit to meet their ideals of strength and usefulness. When we reach Yok Hoi, the Warrior of Light, or even Wuk Lamat can have a heartfelt conversation with him about who he is and how he sees himself, and connect on an emotional level, and then ask to have him moved to Tulialul to serve out his time there. I would then put the Valigarmanda trial directly after the resolution of the Skydeep Senate dungeon, with the Primal attacking Tulialul. This would also be a superb setup for the final scenes discussed previously, as the city will already be reeling from the Valigarmanda attack, not necessarily devastated, but its defenders weakened, empowering the invasion of the Solution 9 troops. Then, when ZoraalJa attacks, Wuk can recruit Bakool Ja Ja for his strength and reliability, give him an earned redemption arc, have him protect the weak of the city and truly earn the acknowledgement that he craved so dearly under the understanding that this measure is temporary, and have him opt to return to his cell when the trouble has passed. This gives Wuk an opportunity to offer him the highest acknowledgement she can give, a royal pardon, and a role within the King's Guard to help protect the city while they investigate the dome and help those in need where he can. This arc keeps him culpable, whilst also granting him a semblance of redemption. Our exploration expedition will be made up of the group that makes the most narrative sense. Going into Dawntrail, Krile feels directionless. She recognises that she's been a support pillar for the rest of the Scions, but hasn't really asked what she wants next. She sees this adventure as an opportunity to walk where her adoptive grandfather, Galuf Baldessian, had walked, and more importantly, to decide for herself whether she's following in his footsteps by choice or by obligation. For Krile, this journey isn't about danger or heroics, it's about discovery, reclaiming her curiosity, gaining a deeper understanding of living cultures, and finding meaning in learning rather than crisis management. She's no longer chasing answers to save the world, she's chasing answers to save herself from stagnation. For G'raha, I feel his motivations for travelling with us are the cleanest. He promised himself that he would live, and we promised we'd take him on our next adventure. He's not coming out of obligation or a calling, he's with us because he's finally allowed to want things, and all he wants is to travel, see the world, and to share stories with the Warrior of Light. For this story, he's the embodiment of post-Endwalker life affirmations. Erenville joins our journey because Tural is his home, and because helping the Warrior of Light and Krile aligns with his role as a guide, mediator, and a bridge between cultures. This is especially important for separating us from Wuk Lamat, as Erenville is able to act as a natural intermediary in her stead. He naturally functions as a cultural translator, a political buffer, and someone who understands both Sharlayan logic and Turalan values. Whilst he lacks the wide-eyed wonder of the others, he has an established rapport with Krile and G'raha, and he respects their scholarship and intentions, and believes the Warrior of Light won't treat Tural as a curiosity or a conquest. With this composition, we have Krile representing curiosity, G'raha representing joyful wandering, and Erenville representing stewardship. Our reminder that these aren't ruins, they're people's homes and inheritance. Now that we have our group, what exactly will we be doing? Largely, nothing. The aim of these quests would be for Krile to spend some additional time learning about her adoptive grandfather, Galuf, by visiting the places he visited, and learning about the cultures and practices of the people he visited. This goes for G'raha also, as both will truly experience a new world as a student, not because they're trying to solve a time-critical problem, or because the world depends on it, but because they want to. This is also where the separation from Wuk Lamat can be experienced best, as her focus should initially be surface-level details of the cultures, and building relationships with the tribes and village elders, politicians and tradespeople, while we're left to truly explore the culture in depth. This is also where I feel the Zibruk Pibil task I mentioned earlier would shine the brightest, as while everybody else is having more surface-level conversations, the banana leaf detail could have been discovered by Krile and G'raha in one of their more in-depth cultural discussions. This would have a more significant impact on the story, as when Wuk is informed, she could then make the decision that her own goals would change to more align with that of Krile and G'raha. She could discover that it's not enough to ask about a culture, it must be observed, lived, in order to truly understand a people and gain a deeper understanding of the world at large. Then, Wuk could join us as a participant in our cultural study, but not the focus. This should also be a key difference between how Wuk and Koana approach the idea of Dawn Servant, as we know that Koana is more technology and future focused, while Wuk is more focused on tradition, but both had the same political upbringing, so initially both would likely play politician rather than seeking deeper understandings of the people they wish to govern. That said, I feel the key to making this work will be how exposition is conveyed, as my main issue with the original story was the reams and reams of unvoiced expositional dialogue. So, as for how these cultures are portrayed to us, it should be through engaging tasks and through voiced cutscenes, not scenes of us standing across from one another blabbing either, but actual visual demonstrations of the culture, either through flashbacks via the echo or performances by the people. Also, why not throw in some fun minigames? Make us learn a cultural dance DDR style, and have us actually learn and perform it. Have a Mamul hunter teach us how they hunt, and let us apply those teachings to the promised Beastmaster job. This is where I'd want the design team to experiment more boldly, to stop thinking about the game as it has been, and look forward to what it can become by looking at other game mechanics, other styles of gameplay, and to shift their focus from retention to invigoration. For this pitch to truly work, all four promises must offer a different answer to the same question for the people of Zoraal, with that question being, what does Zoraal need to survive the future? And Koana's answer to this is the most forward-looking, however, in many ways, it's also the most uncomfortable. From what we know about Koana, he's always been somewhat future-focused, an idea which is introduced to us early, if somewhat glossed over by exposition. He's the only promise who has spent significant time beyond Zoraal's borders. He has studied foreign governance, infrastructure, diplomacy, and technological development, engaged directly with the Sharlayan institutions and scholars. This wasn't something imposed upon him either, it was a deliberate choice. Koana went looking for answers elsewhere because he believes Zoraal cannot afford to remain insular. Koana studied these foreign systems and recruits Thancred for his experience navigating unstable political environments, intelligence gathering and negotiation. He turns to Urianger for historical context, belief systems, and the long arc of civilizations that failed to adapt in time. Koana does not see these advisors as replacements for Zoraal's culture, but as tools to help protect it from a world that is already changing. At his core, Koana's motivations for wanting to become the Dawn Servant are just as noble as Wuk's, the simple belief that isolation is not safety. He has seen the outside world and witnessed expanding global trade, technological acceleration, and the ultimate inevitability of cultural contact. From his perspective, if Zoraal does not modernize intentionally on its own terms, they are liable to be exploited, marginalized, or in the worst case, change will be forced upon them later, far more violently. For Koana, becoming Dawn Servant isn't a craving for recognition or legacy, it's a means to manage inevitability. It's about having the authority to implement safeguards within Zoraali culture by creating their own systems of infrastructure, diplomacy, defense modernization, and trade frameworks. However, this is also the reason Koana is unable to become the Dawn Servant alone. Throughout the Rite, Koana consistently succeeds at the mechanics of each trial. He understands the rules and he anticipates outcomes, but again and again he fails to secure the wholehearted recognition as he misses key moments where reassurance matters far more to people than logic. His legitimacy is purely intellectual. He treats tradition as a variable, not the lived reality of the people he intends to govern. Consequently, he cannot embody the people he seeks to guide as he speaks about them rather than with them, and because of that, their recognition is conditional. This places Koana in direct thematic contrast with Wuk. Where Koana prepares for the future through systems, expertise, and safeguards, Wuk prepares for it through people, by listening, adapting, and allowing herself to be changed by the cultures she encounters. Koana seeks legitimacy through foresight, where Wuk earns it through presence. Neither approach is wrong, but neither is sufficient on its own, either. Koana's arc ultimately asks one of the most important questions that Dawntrail could pose, both to its characters and to the developers. How do you modernize without erasing what already exists? His failure to answer that question alone is not a condemnation of his vision, it's an argument for shared leadership, which is why the conclusion remains the same. Wuk Lamat doesn't replace Koana, she recognizes him by inviting him to stand beside her as the Dawn Servant. She acknowledges that Zoraal needs both continuity and change, not in opposition, but in balance. I've spoken a considerable amount about Wuk already in this video, so this section is just to tie off some loose ends and clearly legitimize her by the end of the MSQ. So, it wasn't until Wuk realized that the Rite would no longer be an insular affair that she decided to recruit the aid of another, only she didn't turn to an institution for validation. Instead, she chooses to engage the wider world on her own terms, and where Koana had sought knowledge, advisors, and systems, Wuk sought perspective, balance, and someone who would challenge her, not manage her. This is why the Warrior of Light is her natural choice, not the scholars. The Warrior of Light is someone whose reputation has been built not on theory or conquest, but on navigating cultures without erasing them. This contrast defines their approaches to leadership. Koana prepares for the future through systems by importing expertise, whereas Wuk prepares for it through people and from importing an external conscience. Ultimately, after the defeat at Valigarmanda, Wuk is crowned the Dawn Servant by her father, having earned all the keystones and the recognition of each culture and tribe she's interacted with. Following the story, this was always going to be the outcome, and I feel that Bakool Ja Ja knew this as the Rite started. Contrasting her to the other promises, where Zoraal Ja sought authority without consent, Bakool Ja Ja seeks validation without stewardship, and Koana seeks stewardship without connection, Wuk bridges all these shortcomings by demonstrating that she takes the servant from the title very seriously. Wuk is gifted validation through her care, empathy, and understanding of the cultures she wishes to serve, and connects with each of them in such a way that to most all tribes visited, she is the standout candidate. What makes Wuk special is, whilst she's not the smartest person we've ever met, her emotional intelligence is off the charts, and her deep understanding of her own shortcomings allow her to reflect on what Zoraal is to her, and what it needs to survive in an ever-connecting world. This is why she needs to be the one to offer Koana the position of Dawn Servant alongside her, and recognize Bakool Ja Ja's emotional turmoil and offering him a purpose. She doesn't seek permission, she uses her authority to act decisively in Zoraal's best interest. Wuk Lamat is a goofy character, sure, but that's what makes her so lovable and relatable. She lives out loud, she's not ashamed to be herself and express who she is to the world, and by removing all of the unnecessary talk to Wuk Lamat quests from the MSQ, we're left with a much tighter story, not focused solely on our protagonist, but on the other promises and our Expiditioners, without the need for complicating or muddying the story by introducing Solution 9 so soon. She becomes the emotional centre of the expansion, rather than its key point of contention, as she deserves to be, allowing for the Warrior of Light to simply be an observer, to participate in the story without being lent on constantly. We're here for an adventure with our friends, and to simply enjoy the ride. Had we not been there, it's likely that things would have played out similarly, just without such a considerable emphasis on understanding the cultures. But it's likely Wuk would have come to this conclusion on her own anyway, as she's so drawn to the traditions and cultures of the people that she meets. Leaving Solution 9 to the post-MSQ patches gives a multitude of changes to the formula previously followed by Square Enix in the Final Fantasy XIV expansions. The foremost being that the last zones are locked until the first patch, meaning that players would need to do the patch story to unlock these new areas before accessing the first set of raid bosses. In my retelling, the first patch would take Wuk through the key points that we hit on to reach Solution 9 originally, and confront ZoraalJa a little more rapidly. Thancred would have scouted the entrance to Solution 9 through the tunnel that we used originally, and would have prompted the engineers to manufacture the train to the specs needed to break through while he travels back to Tulialo to inform us of these events. Once Wuk had been able to ensure that the city is secure and Bakool Ja Ja and Koana are fit to defend it in her absence, we would then travel with our group of Wuk, Kryl, Grahatia, Thancred and Urianger to Heritage Found, where we look for a way into Solution 9. Only this time we don't meet Ffxiv. We're directed towards the entrance by the automatons. As we reach Solution 9 proper, we're greeted by Ffxiv, who is introduced as the caretaker of Solution 9. There's no faffing around, no drawn out exploration. Wuk challenges ZoraalJa to face her and explain his actions against his own people. ZoraalJa, whose last 30 years have been him building his army and building an echo chamber in his mind about how rule should have been his by birthright and how his power should have been enough for his father to recognize him as Dawn Servant. Thinking himself superior, he invites Wuk up to his chambers to discuss her grievances, which we do, and on reaching him, we can see how he's changed. Physically, in minor ways, he's aged and now wears a regulator, but it's when ZoraalJa reveals his intent to impose Solution 9's model on Zoraal in order to save it from inefficiency, dissent and weakness. And it's when he frames himself as the only one willing to do what must be done to ensure the prosperity of Zoraal that Wuk challenges him once more. At what cost will his salvation be found, as we know that their seeming immortality isn't free? It's here that we notice something a little off with ZoraalJa, and as much as Wuk wants to help, we must insist that we deal with him. And our suspicions are confirmed when his regulator begins to flash white, and we see lights drain and ZoraalJa grow in strength significantly. ZoraalJa confronts us as Dawn Servant in name, armed with borrowed immortality, happy to consume as many souls as necessary to defeat us. Alas, our defeating him shatters his illusions of control and exposes the hollowness of his victory. Then, as ZoraalJa is defeated, Wuk steps forward and enacts her justice against her brother for invading her home, murdering her people, and taking the life of her father. He is sentenced to death, carried out in one fell swing. Now, this is only half the patch. The rest would ultimately play out as an abridged version of the Solution 9 story, with Ffxiv revealing herself as the ruler of Alexandria all the way to patch 7.3 story. The 7.4 patch story focusing on Kryl and giving her some closure should remain untouched, but her meeting with her parents, whilst cut shorter and the comic relief removed, keeping the heart of the encounter intact, should be the main focus of that content. Then there's the Kakahiwa questline that would also receive a similar abridgment with Erenville, but keeping the emotional beats without shifting focus away from them. That's how I feel all of these events should have played out. It would give a much more emotional tone to the expansion, and whilst the story would be a little bit shorter, I think more people would be willing to accept it, because as the stakes wouldn't be higher because of some cataclysmic event, they're heightened because of our emotional connection to the story, and that's all we really needed. Lastly, I don't know where else I'd get to say any of this stuff, so I'm just going to tack it on here. The following are general changes I'd make to gearing and rewards to improve the overall player experience. With the distance between major patches ranging between 19 and 20 weeks, I feel this is too long to keep rewards locked in content, especially for those who want to play and gear multiple jobs and characters. As such, these locks should be removed after 12 weeks. Allow players to raid and gear progressively for the first 12 weeks, and to be the first and to enjoy the grind, but also allow an opportunity before the next big patch to acquire gear more rapidly for other characters and other jobs. Also, the arbitrary lower loot pools for groups with players who have already cleared for the week should also be removed here. While I'm at it, book costs for the equipment and the accessories, they need to be reduced to the following: 2 book 1s per accessory, 3 book 2s per head, arm and foot gear, 4 book 3s per body and leg gear, 6 book 4s per weapon, 2 book 2s per glaze, and 3 book 3s per twine and solvent. In this day and age, there's no need to keep rewards locked for a whole patch, especially as people might want to catch up before the next patch cycle. These arbitrary limits remove agency from the player and prevent them from actually just enjoying the content. Savage and upgraded tome gear should always be the best in slot, without question. However, there needs to be more options to obtain raid equivalent eye level gear outside of Savage raids. This is what would have been perfect for the Occult Crescent to provide, or the Chaotic variant or Deep dungeons. They're usually released a few small patches after the Savage content, so having semi-equivalent gear as a reward would only further incentivize players to not only continue playing the content, but experiment with different combinations of gear and expand their horizons on the content that they play. By introducing sideways progression, everybody wins. There's a less challenging, more grindy way to gain stronger gear that doesn't take away anything from the more hardcore players, but offers an olive branch to more mid-core players who may be looking to explore harder content. Not to mention, not every reward needs to be based on power. Why not introduce some gear pieces that enhance the role abilities? Where, for example, wearing a complete tank set from side content gives that player worse stats than Biss, but a new action that provides an additional 10% mitigation option for 20 seconds. A ranged slot that gives a 50% boost to critical chance for 10 seconds. A healing slot that triples mana recovery for 15 seconds. If ever there was a time to look at introducing new mechanics, new functions, and new ways to play and enjoy the game, it's now. Ultimately, none of these changes are about making the game easier, they're about making it more generous with agency. Rewards shouldn't exist to control player behavior, they should exist to support it. If someone wants to raid hard for 12 weeks, they should be rewarded for that. But right now, the game often tells players when they're done. Done for the week, done for the patch, done with this content until the next reset. But if someone wants to keep playing, keep experimenting, or gear multiple jobs without feeling punished for their enthusiasm, the game should meet them halfway. The changes I've proposed would flip the old age question of have you cleared to do you want to keep playing? And if the answer is yes, the game should let you. All of this comes back to, for me, is enjoyment. And in a post-Endwalker world, 14 doesn't need to be tighter or stingier with rewards. It needs to be more flexible. And that's it. My little foray into creative writing. I really didn't want to be one of those people that only offers criticism without proposing a better way. So this was a good opportunity for me to put my money where my mouth is, as it were, and propose something I feel would have been a bit more enjoyable or engaging, something more impactful than what we received. Thank you if you've made it this far. From the bottom of my heart. I know attention is a valued commodity, and I really appreciate you spending some of it here with me. all of that said, now I'd really love to hear from you. What did you think about my proposals? I want to know what you think about the expansion, what you've liked about the expansion, what you would have liked to have seen in the expansion yourselves, and what you're looking forward to most about the next one. With all that said, once more, all that's really left for me to say is I've been Wiley, and from Amarot's depths to the edge of our star, we remember him. We remember them.
A test of your reflexes!